Welcome to a Deltek Time and Expense tutorial covering expense reports. First, to access the expense module, follow the same steps you would use to access your timesheet. Open your browser and navigate to Deltek Time and Expense. The login screen will appear. Enter your username, password, and system into the corresponding boxes. Your login will be the same as your time and expense login. To create an expense report, click the navigation bar at the top of the screen and navigate to Expense, Expense Reports, Manage Expense Report. The toolbar within the expense report screen consists of a query button that allows you to search for specific records by entering search criteria into some or all of the boxes. The Table or Form button switches you back and forth between Table View and Form View. You can use either depending on your preference, though some options may only be available depending on the view you are utilizing. The arrow buttons allow you to navigate between records. And the New Expense Report button allows you to create a new record. A new expense report screen will be displayed unless you already have an expense report in progress, in which case, simply select the New Expense Report button to start a new expense report. If you are creating an expense report from an expense authorization, select the expense authorization number from the drop-down, and the information will auto-populate from the expense authorization. In the Purpose tab, select the appropriate expense report type from the drop-down menu. Then fill in a short description in the description box. This field will be displayed on the employee's desktop. Fill out the From and To boxes with the period of performance for the expenses. And fill out the Purpose box with the purpose behind your travel or expenses. If your expense includes travel, select the Locations tab and enter each location included in your travel expense. In the Location box, either look up or enter the location you traveled to. Ensure the start and end dates for your trip are correct using the Start Date and End Date boxes. You can click on the View button in the Per Diem Rates box to view the per diem rate for the select destination. You also have the option to enter a comment about each location. To add another location, after the previous location is entered fully, select the Add Location button on the right side of the table and fill out the boxes respectively for other locations you will be traveling to. To delete a location, click the arrow in the far left box to highlight the selection, then click the Delete button at the right of the screen. An X will display in the box, but the delete will not be made permanent until you save the expense report. To add a location to favorites, select the location and click the Add to Favorites button so the location can be easily used in the future. Next, select the Default Charges tab. In this tab, you will enter the charge number or numbers to which your expenses will be allocated. In the Charge box, either enter the charge number manually or look up the charge by selecting the magnifying glass. By using the Charge Lookup feature, a window will display showing the charge trees that you have access to. Navigate through the hierarchy of expenses until you find the correct charge. Click on the charge and hit the Select button. Add new charges by clicking the New button and selecting the appropriate charge. You can delete charges by selecting the charge and clicking the Delete button. Remember that the default allocation percentage must aggregate to 100%. Each item that is added to the expense report may be charged to a different charge number, and at a different allocation percentage. Select the Save and Continue button in the toolbar at the top of the screen to save and enter the completed expense background information. Use the Claimed Expenses section to enter incurred expenses on the expense report. In the category box, select the appropriate expense category from the drop-down, then select the appropriate expense type in the expense type box. Provide details about your expense, including any dates, comments, or descriptions that are necessary. Click on the Amount tab. Select your payment method from the Payment Method drop-down and enter your expenses incurred. Fill out the personal and unallowable boxes as necessary. Click on the Charge Allocations Under Ceiling subtask, the Charge Allocations Over Ceiling subtask, or the Charge Allocations Unallowable subtask to detail out the amount, project, account, and organization for each charge type. To select the charge type, click the box to the left of the charge type you want to select. If you entered multiple projects, you may need to enter or adjust the correct allocation percentage per project line. You have the ability to add an additional charge by clicking the Add Charge button. To allocate across multiple projects by amount rather than percentage, click the Allocate by Amount button. To add another expense, click the Add Claimed Expense button and follow the same steps as before. Remember, you need to add a line for each expense incurred. If adding lodging to an expense report, note that the lodging reimbursement is based on your work location. To add lodging, highlight the lodging expense type and the charge will default to the location chosen as the work location in your expense report setup. Next, fill out the Room Rates tab by entering the dates, room rates, and tax rates. If adding meals to an expense report, first note that meals at the per diem rate will automatically adjust to the current per diem rate for your destination location. For all meals purchased, select or check the corresponding box in the Meal Details tab when prompted. When meals are provided for you, please ensure the box is unchecked. If the box is not checked, or you are creating a duplicate expense report, an error message will pop up stating that the meal has already been claimed and is therefore not reimbursable. If adding a business meals expense, this covers costs incurred as a result of business meetings and conferences. You are required to provide a purpose for the business meal and a list of attendees, which includes at least one person in addition to yourself. Click the tabs to add meal details, attendee details, and amounts for your business meal expense. When adding miles to an expense report, fill out the number of miles you traveled for business and then any personal miles on top of that. The expense amount will be calculated for you based on the per diem rate and the amount of miles traveled. Click Save and Continue when you are finished adding expenses. Click the Submit button located in the header of the expense report. Your expense report will now show the status of submitted. After your expense report has been submitted, you can add receipts by clicking on the status field hyperlink within the expense report. This will bring up the workflow status section of the expense report. Click on the line that shows the task item as attach, then click the Attach button at the bottom right of the table. Click the Choose File button to locate the receipt file. Click Open and then click Upload. The task item line will now show a status of attached. You can view your attached receipts by selecting the attached line and clicking the View button at the bottom right of the table. Once the receipts are uploaded and you have signed the expense report is routed to your supervisor for approval. You can track the progress of an expense report by opening the Workflow Status section of the expense report. Primary supervisors can launch expense reports requiring approval by navigating to Expense, Expense Reports, Manage Approve Expense Reports to locate outstanding actions in the Manage Expense Reports portion of the screen. If you are approving an expense report on behalf of someone else, you can search for expense reports requiring approval using the Search option under Expense, Expense Reports, Manage Approve Expense Reports. Change Filter By to Status, change function to the appropriate role, check whatever status is necessary for action, and filter results using any additional information you have. Click Execute when finished filling out the criteria. The expense reports that meet the search criteria will appear in the Manage Expense Report section of the screen. Review the expense report by examining the necessary criteria, then select the report by clicking on the Status field hyperlink within the expense report. In the Workflow Status section of the expense report, select the task item titled Approve and either click the Perform Selected Task button to approve the expense report or the Reject Selected Task button to reject the expense report. Time and Expense 10 users have the option to use a feature called Wizard Mode. Wizard Mode switches the time and expense layout to something more similar to T&E 9. So for those who are more accustomed to that version, this feature may be of interest. To switch to Wizard Mode, click on the wand icon in the top of the toolbar. Note, the next time you log into CostPoint, you will be defaulted back to the original T&E 10 layout, known as Expert Mode. To change your default layout to Wizard Mode, click the person icon in the top right of the screen. Click on Save Application Layout. The screen will automatically close and your default will now be Wizard Mode. To change your default back to Expert Mode, click on the wand icon and then follow the same steps to save your default. Note, you need to change your default for expense authorizations and expense reports separately. In Wizard Mode, screens will now look differently and will help guide users through the screens. On the left side of the screen, you will now see a side panel detailing the different portions of the expense report, but functionally the expense report will work the same. The side panel on the left replaces the subtasks. You can click on any of the lines to review that section of the expense report. The check marks will show you which sections are completed. Depending on the screen being used, you will either see a Continue or Save Report button. Press the Continue and Save Report buttons to advance forward as you fill out your expense report. The back button can be used to move to the previous screen. Note, the expense category is no longer used. The user will only select expense type. Once you have entered all your expenses, click the Submit button located in the bottom right of the screen. If you have not already attached your receipts to the Overall Attachments line, you will receive a pop-up at this time to attach receipts. Click the Attach button to attach your receipts. The following certification pop-up will appear. You need to agree to the statement and then press the Update Report button to continue. If your company requires expense authorizations for certain expenses, you can create an expense authorization by navigating to Expense, Expense Authorizations, Manage Expense Authorizations. The process for creating an expense authorization is almost identical to creating an expense report. The only obvious difference is that an expense authorization is a request for an expense that will take place in the future. So unlike an expense report, when you are filling in expenses already accrued, you are anticipating future expenses with an expense authorization. So, the To and From fields and Start Date and End Date fields should all represent the date or dates of when you anticipate your expense to occur. You will also notice that when you add planned expenses to your expense report, the Amounts sections will be replaced by an Estimate box where you can enter your estimated expense amount.